Imagine a vast, empty plain under a blistering sun. On one side, a king who believes he is a god, leading an army of hardened veterans who have never known defeat. On the other, a great king, the ruler of the largest empire the world has ever known, who has gathered a force of unimaginable size to defend his throne. This is not just a battle. It is the final act of a world-changing drama. Two kings, two empires, one final day to decide the fate of the known world. At Gaugamela, history itself would hold its breath as Alexander the Great and Darius III clashed in the winner-take-all contest that would forge a new age. The year is 331 BCE. 2 years have passed since the Battle of Issus, where Alexander had shattered a Persian army and forced Darius to flee, leaving his own family behind. Since then, the young Macedonian king had marched relentlessly, conquering the entire Mediterranean coast from Syria to Egypt, where he was hailed as a liberator and crowned pharaoh. He had systematically dismantled the Persian Empire's naval power, ensuring his supply lines were safe. During this time, Darius sent offers of peace. He offered Alexander all the lands west of the Euphrates River, a fortune in gold, and his own daughter's hand in marriage. Alexander's seasoned general, Parmenion, famously said, "If I were Alexander, I would accept." Alexander's legendary reply, "So would I, if I were Parmenion." For Alexander, this was not about territory. It was about destiny. He wanted it all. Darius, his generous offers scorned, knew there would be no more negotiations. He spent 2 years gathering a new, colossal army from the furthest reaches of his empire, determined to crush the Macedonian upstart once and for all. Darius chose the battlefield with meticulous care. He would not be caught in a narrow pass like at Issus again. He selected a wide, perfectly flat plain near the village of Gaugamela in modern-day Iraq. This was his ideal killing ground, a place where his overwhelming numbers and, most importantly, his chariots and cavalry could operate without restriction. He even had his engineers level the ground, clearing it of any shrubs or hills that might impede the charge of his ultimate terror weapon, the scythed chariot. The army Darius assembled was a breathtaking spectacle of imperial power. Ancient sources, though prone to exaggeration, paint a picture of a force that may have numbered 250,000 men, drawn from dozens of nations. At its heart were the Persian elite, the 10,000 immortals, the finest heavy infantry of the empire, and a massive contingent of heavy cavalry. They were joined by warriors from across Asia, Bactrians, Scythians, Indians, and Babylonians. This was not just an army. It was the entire might of a continent gathered to defend its king. Among this vast host were 2 specialized and terrifying units. First, 200 scythed chariots. These were heavy, 4-horse chariots fitted with long, razor-sharp blades extending from the wheels, designed to slice through infantry formations like a gruesome scythe through wheat. To add to the horror, Darius had also brought 15 Indian war elephants, titanic beasts trained to trample and terrorize enemy soldiers, a sight most Greeks had never seen, and a sound they would never forget. Facing this imperial behemoth was Alexander's army of 47,000 men. Though vastly outnumbered, they were a unified, professional fighting force of hardened veterans. They were comprised of the Macedonian phalanx, the unstoppable wall of 18-foot pikes, and the finest cavalry in the world, the companion cavalry, led by Alexander himself. These men had followed their king across the known world. They were bound by years of shared hardship and victory. They were not fighting for an empire. They were fighting for the man who led them, a king they believed was invincible. As the 2 armies made camp, the contrast between them was stark. The Persian camp was a city of noise and light, a nervous buzz of 100,000 men preparing for battle. Fearing a surprise night attack from the audacious Macedonian king, Darius ordered his entire army to remain awake and in formation all night long. Torches burned across the plain as the sleepless, anxious army waited for a dawn they dreaded. The Macedonian camp, by contrast, was quiet and dark. Alexander, against the advice of his generals, refused to consider a night attack. He famously declared, "I will not steal my victory." He ordered his men to eat a full meal and get a good night's sleep. He exuded an aura of absolute confidence that spread throughout his army. While the Persian king stood watch over his exhausted troops, Alexander the Great, on the eve of the most important battle of his life, slept soundly in his tent, as if it were any other day. When he awoke, he gathered his commanders to lay out his plan, a masterpiece of tactical genius designed to counter every one of Darius's advantages. He knew a direct assault was suicide. Instead, he would advance in an oblique or diagonal formation. He would lead his elite right wing forward at an angle, moving towards the edge of the prepared battlefield, seemingly trying to outflank the Persians. This would force the Persian left wing to move to counter him, stretching their line, and, he hoped, creating a gap. To counter the threat of being enveloped by the massive Persian army, Alexander designed a defense in depth. He arranged his troops in what was essentially a large rectangle. Behind his main phalanx, he placed a second line of infantry at an angle, ready to turn and face any flanking attack. This reserve line was his insurance policy, a brilliant innovation that could turn a defensive box into an offensive killing zone if the Persians tried to surround him. Finally, he had a specific plan for the scythed chariots. He ordered the front ranks of his infantry to open gaps in their formation at the last second, creating channels for the chariots to pass harmlessly through. Men in the rear would then hurl javelins at the horses and drivers, neutralizing the threat. It was a plan that required immense discipline and courage, a testament to the trust he had in his men. With the plan set, the Macedonians marched onto the field, ready to face their destiny. The battle began with Alexander leading his right wing forward in his planned oblique advance. He moved further and further to the right, drawing the Persian left flank with him. Darius, seeing Alexander moving off the cleared ground he had prepared for his chariots, grew anxious. Fearing Alexander would succeed in flanking him, he ordered his Scythian and Bactrian cavalry on his left to charge and halt the Macedonian advance. A massive and brutal cavalry battle erupted on the right flank. Believing the Macedonian lines were now engaged and fixed, Darius unleashed his ultimate weapon, the scythed chariots. They thundered across the plain, a terrifying wall of noise and flashing blades, aimed directly at the heart of the Macedonian phalanx. But Alexander's plan worked to perfection. The veteran infantry held their nerve, opened their ranks, and shouted, creating a channel of noise and death. The chariots, their momentum spent, were funneled harmlessly through the gaps, where they were picked off by javelins and swordsmen. The terror weapon had been turned into a triviality. Meanwhile, on the Macedonian left flank, the situation was becoming desperate. Alexander's second-in-command, the old general Parmenion, was facing the full might of the Persian right-wing cavalry, led by Mazaeus. Parmenion was massively outnumbered and being pushed back. The Persian cavalry was on the verge of breaking through his line and enveloping the entire Macedonian army. He sent a desperate rider to Alexander, begging for reinforcements. But Alexander was focused on the center. His diagonal advance had done exactly what he had hoped. As the Persian left flank cavalry had charged out to meet him, they had pulled away from their own infantry. A fatal gap had opened in the Persian line, directly between their left wing and their center. This was the moment Alexander had been waiting for, the single point of weakness in the Persian behemoth. He had created his opportunity. Without a moment's hesitation, Alexander wheeled the companion cavalry, forming them into a giant wedge formation with himself at its very tip. He abandoned the cavalry fight on the flank and charged directly into the gap, a human spear aimed at one target and one target only, Darius III. The companions, armed with their deadly 12-foot Sistan lances, crashed through the weakened Persian line, shattering the royal guard infantry and riding straight for the great king's chariot. For a moment, the two kings were within sight of each other. Alexander, the warrior king, covered in dust and blood, leading the charge from the front. Darius, the emperor, a remote figure on a magnificent war chariot, suddenly found the whirlwind of battle at his doorstep. Javelins fell around him. His royal guards were being cut to pieces. The sight of Alexander himself, a figure of seemingly supernatural fury, broke Darius's nerve. He had seen this before at Issus. Convinced the battle was lost, he turned his chariot and fled the field, leaving his army to its fate. The flight of the great king had a catastrophic effect. Word spread like wildfire through the Persian center and left wing. The king has fled. The morale of the army, already strained, collapsed completely. The vast formations dissolved as soldiers threw down their weapons and ran for their lives. The battle on that side of the field had turned into a complete rout. Alexander and his companions were in hot pursuit of Darius, with the ultimate prize, the capture of the Persian king, within their grasp. But at that very moment, the desperate message from Parmenion finally reached him. The left flank was crumbling. The Persian cavalry under Mosaius had broken through and were now attacking the Macedonian camp in the rear. Alexander was faced with a terrible choice. He could continue his pursuit of Darius, a chase that would cement his personal glory and end the war on the spot. Or he could abandon his prize, turn back, and save his men and his army from annihilation. It was a defining moment of his character. He chose his men. Cursing his luck, Alexander rallied the companions and wheeled them around, giving up the chase for Darius to charge back into the fray and relieve his beleaguered left flank. They smashed into the rear of the triumphant Persian cavalry, who, caught completely by surprise while looting the Macedonian camp, were themselves routed. Alexander had saved his army. With both flanks now broken, the rout of the Persian army was absolute. The Macedonians hunted the fleeing soldiers across the plain, a slaughter that lasted for the rest of the day. The riches found in the Persian camp were beyond comprehension. Mounds of gold and silver, luxurious tents, and Darius's personal war chariot and bow, abandoned in his haste. The casualties were staggering. While Alexander may have lost only a few hundred men, tens of thousands of Persian soldiers lay dead on the field of Gaugamela. Darius managed to escape into the mountains, but he was a king with no army and no empire. His authority had vanished. He would later be betrayed and assassinated by one of his own satraps, a pitiful end for the ruler of the world's greatest empire. Alexander would give his fallen rival a royal funeral, a final act of respect for the man whose throne he had taken. The Battle of Gaugamela was one of the most complete and decisive victories in military history. It was the final, irreversible blow that shattered the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which had dominated the world for over 2 centuries. Alexander marched unopposed into the legendary city of Babylon, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator hailed by the populace. He was now, without question, the undisputed king of Asia. The battle was the ultimate validation of Alexander's military genius. It was a victory of superior tactics, training, and leadership over overwhelming numbers. The innovative use of the oblique advance, the refused flank, and the reserve phalanx would be studied by generals for thousands of years. Gaugamela didn't just win a war, it ended an era and began a new one. It opened the door for Hellenistic culture to spread across the East, creating a fusion of worlds that would forever change the course of human civilization. The dust that settled on the plain of Gaugamela covered the remains of an old world and fertilized the ground for a new one. It was the day a young king truly fulfilled his destiny, forever earning his title, Alexander the Great. If you were captivated by this story of tactical genius and world-altering ambition, please hit the like button and subscribe for more epic tales from history. Let us know in the comments. Do you think Alexander made the right choice in turning back to save his men? Thanks for watching.